The Labour government is currently embroiled in a massive smear scandal, which, if there's justice, would bring the whole government down. Although the government has, of course, been falling apart, partly, I have to say, due to the efforts of one of the central victim of the smear campaign, Paul Holden, who wrote The Fraud, which examines in great detail how Keir Starmer's entire leadership was based on lies, deceit, and all sorts of outrageous behaviour. Um, we'll talk about what this smear campaign has meant and this scandal that is now embroiling the government, including the Cabinet Office Minister Josh Simons. This focuses on the work that Paul has done about Labour Together, which was an outfit set up to crush the left within the Labour Party and to deceive them into voting for Keir Starmer, the membership, that is, of the Labour Party. And the response of scrutiny to smear Paul and other journalists as being involved in a Russian-linked conspiracy. There's more to this, honestly. It sounds insane, and I must emphasize it is insane. Um, and it just shows that the people we are dealing with here are very, I can just say this, I'm just not the most journalistic kind of language, but they're bad people. And Keir Starmer's whole pitch for a while was integrity and all the rest of it. This is behavior that is some of the worst possible behavior you could possibly hear about in British politics. Hey, Paul, how you doing?
I'm good, and thank you. How are you doing?
It's funny because we just put on press record loads of stuff involving you
Mhm.
and the British government was just like leaking all over the place. I was a bit scared to press record. So there is a lot going on at the moment. Let's
Mhm.
just get people up to speed, shall we? Okay, about because you're the victim of this smear campaign by figures now in the Labour government and who are at the absolute core of the Starmer project.
Mhm.
What? So just explain, just so everyone's on the right page. What the hell is Labour Together,
Mhm.
and what were its intentions?
Sure. So Labour Together was a think tank, and describes itself as a think tank, but I think it's better understood as a sort of a political pressure group. Um, it started in 2015. The original idea behind Labour Together and its founders, it was founded by a guy called John Cruddas, who's a Labour MP. And the initial idea was pretty noble. The idea was that at the time, Jeremy Corbyn had just been elected the leader of the Labour Party. And John Cruddas and some of his colleagues were concerned that right-wing Labour MPs in the Labour Party would refuse to accept Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and lead a breakaway, which would at that point basically make the Labour Party unelectable for a number of generations, as it happened in the 80s. So Labour Together was initially set up to try and facilitate dialogue between the different factions of the party, make sure that everybody could at least stay in the same room to fight their combined enemy, which is the Tories. Um, which meant that it was the perfect vehicle for Morgan McSweeney. So in 2017, after the general election, of course, at that stage, everybody in the Labour right wing thought that Jeremy Corbyn would do absolutely awfully. But in that general election, the Labour Party did much better than expected and got over 40% of the national vote. But for people like McSweeney, who are from the right wing of the party, um, generally despise left wing people and the Corbynite style of politics in particular, sort of anti imperialist, stop the war politics. This was a disaster. So almost immediately after the July 2017 election, he goes to work for Labour Together as effectively its managing director. And what Morgan McSweeney does is two things between 2017 and 2020. And we know this because he was actually writing sort of strategy documents around this. Is the one is that he would work covertly with a range of political allies to wreck the reputation and of the Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party, and start attacks on the sort of informational ecosystem, media ecosystem, independent media ecosystem that sustained Corbynism within the Labour Party. And at the same time, they would then choose a successor to Jeremy Corbyn, whose campaign they would incubate. And in July 2019, the person they choose is Sir Keir Starmer. So what they're effectively doing between 2017 and 2020 is this incredibly problematic, I call it despicable campaign, um, to destroy the prospects that the Labour Party could win in a future general election, because they needed the Labour Party to lose so that Jeremy Corbyn would have to be forced out, which would then allow them to choose a person of their liking, which is Sir Keir Starmer, as a precursor to effectively taking the Labour Party over, capturing it entirely, and purging it of anything that's vaguely left wing or socialist. Now, there's a whole range of scandalous behavior within that story, and the sort of the two most relevant parts of that here is that this whole project that Morgan McSweeney is running, the sort of project of mass misdirection, because he was pretending that Labour Together was trying to unite the party's factions when it was doing the opposite, was funded with close to £750,000 in donations made by a hedge fund manager called Martin Taylor, who supports Labour right. In fact, long supported politicians of the Labour right, and a guy called Sir Trevor Chin, who is a sort of widely quite well known pro-Israeli figure in British politics. Those donations weren't declared at all to the Electoral Commission as they're required to be under the law. So effectively, the entirety of, or the vast majority of Morgan McSweeney's secret campaign was funded with this undeclared money. And the second part of it is this campaign to destroy independent left-wing media outlets, which then mutates into this bizarre, crazy, mad story. But effectively, in the beginning of 2019, Morgan McSweeney works with a guy called Imran Ahmed, who's now the CEO of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, and they create this campaign called Stop Funding Fake News. Under this campaign, they pretend to be a bunch of grassroots activists when actually it's Morgan McSweeney, a Labour Party insider, running this think tank, Imran Ahmed, who's a factional spin doctor, and Steve Reed, who is a cabinet minister who supports them. He's in the shadow cabinet at the time, and is now a cabinet minister. Run this campaign pretending to be grassroots activists, claiming that left-wing media is knowingly publishing lies in order to stoke hate in society. And it's an extremely effective campaign that targets advertisers and forces advertisers to withdraw their advertising from sites like the Canary, which at the time is sort of celebrated, sadly, by quite a lot of centrist journalists. The thing that I think people didn't anticipate would become a major problem at the time is that as Stop Funding Fake News is quite successful, by the sort of the end of 2019, it starts mutating organically and opportunistically into a much bigger global anti-disinformation campaign. So, for example, Stop Funding Fake News, while Morgan McSweeney still seems to be peripherally involved in some way, is targeting right-wing websites in America. So it's going after Zero Hate, it's going after Breitbart, right? That story is now broken in the States in a major way, right? It hasn't broken here, people don't want to talk about it, but effectively the right wing in America understands very clearly that for a long period of time, this organization, CCDH, that they started, was targeting right-wing American websites and trying to get them demonetized, and it's linked to Keir Starmer's campaign through Morgan McSweeney. So hugely controversial in the States, really, really, really controversial. And those are the two things that I was trying to expose in my reporting. So to take the story forward in time to sort of explain where the smears came from, is that by mid-2023, I'd received, a couple of years before, this incredible leak of documents out of the Labour Party, just like this phenomenal leak of documents from whistleblowers who were concerned about serious misconduct in the Labour Party. And I had started working towards a book which would become The Fraud, and I approached the Sunday Times in 2023 alongside an American journalist called Matt Taibbi. And basically the two tracks were I was going to work with UK-based journalists in the Sunday Times to reveal more information about the undeclared donations, because I thought we had evidence that could at least raise questions about whether Morgan McSweeney had purposefully decided not to report the donations. And in America, I would then be breaking the stories about the ways in which McSweeney and Labour Together and Imran Ahmed had created this very controversial organization, CCDH, in America, which at the time would have been extremely problematic for what everybody believed was the incoming Labour government. Because really what you're looking at here, in a very simple way, is you're looking at this incredibly politically damaging story about a dodgy, covert campaign run with illegal money, undeclared money, to install Keir Starmer as the Prime Minister of the Labour Party, and to simultaneously launch this despicable campaign against independent media and journalism, which they mutated into like a pan-Atlantic, like massively controversial political football in the United States. So that would have been a disaster, really, if the full story like that had come out uncontested in 2023 and 2024. Um, so that's the beginning of the smear campaign. Is that I go to Gabriel Pogrund and Harry York at the Sunday Times, and they publish a front page story in November 2023. At the same time, Matt Taibbi publishes my first story on CCDH, and my publisher puts up a little blurb that says, "The fraud is coming. This is what it's going to say." And it's at that point that everything starts going a bit mad.
to say the least. And just as a bit of context for people, just so we're clear that there's no exaggeration here about, for example, Morgan Sweeney and his aims. Nick Forbes, the former leader of Newcastle City Council and a close associate of Morgan Sweeney, once said about him, he doesn't have room for compromise with the hard left. He thinks they need to be eradicated from the party because they are so dangerous. So that's a kind of pithy summary, I guess, from a close ally of his about his aims and objectives, which is what Labour Together turned into organizational form. Just explain, because we're this is really, I mean, it's literally just carrying on to explode as I'm talking to you. I'll periodically check on social media to see what the latest is. But tell us what that's just tell us the nature of the smear, because it's so crazy,
Yes.
and how it was put together and by who.
Sure. So basically, as soon as the Sunday Times article comes out, Labour Together appoints this management firm called APCO Worldwide, which is like a PR agency that has represented amazing people around the world and very salubrious clients like tobacco companies, oil companies, the governments of Kazakhstan, Saudi Arabia, and the Israeli arms company Elbit. Um, and we now have a copy of the leaked contract between APCO and Labour Together. And it's very clear what this contract says is that we know the story in the Sunday Times has happened. We know that Paul Holden and Matt Taibbi are working on more stuff, that Paul Holden's writing a book. We will develop a body of evidence that could be packaged up in order to proactively undermine their reporting. And then it sets out all the tools they'll use to undertake this investigation. So it's digital forensics, human intelligence, financial auditing, like an incredibly invasive, like full scale rectal probe of me and other journalists to establish what they think is our nefarious instincts and impulses. And what eventually, I mean, it's a mad story. They start looking into a whole range of journalists beyond me. They look into Matt Taibbi. They look into another journalist called Paul Thacker. They look into Henry Dyer, who's now at the Guardian. They look into Gabriel Pogrund. They look into Henry York, who's now at Harry York, who's at the Sunday Times. And long story short, they eventually end up writing getting some mad report written called Operation Cannon. And Operation Cannon is this 58-page report, which claims that myself and my colleague Andrew Feinstein, who I've worked with for a long time and you've had on your show before, alongside Gabriel Pogrund, are participants in a broader Russian state conspiracy to undermine the incoming Labour Party. They actually say in this Operation Cannon, I have to say, I've not seen a copy of it, but some people who have seen a copy of it have told me what's in it. And they they say that, and I always find this very funny when they tell me this, but they say in this report that I am connected to South African intelligence via the ANC, which has then connected me to Russian intelligence. Now, of course, I'm originally from South Africa. What this leaves out, of course, is that the first 10 years of my career were spent investigating corruption on the part of the ANC, including corruption on the part of two former sitting presidents. It also ignores the fact that Andrew Feinstein is literally the first witness for the state in the prosecution of Jacob Zuma, who's the former president of South Africa and the former president of the ANC, who he's been investigating for corruption for 2 decades. It also ignores the fact that me and Andrew have investigated Russian oligarchs in the past, which led to a series of legal and extra-legal threats. And effectively, for 2 years, myself and Andrew Feinstein couldn't even go back to South Africa under threat of arrest between 2014 and 2016 because we investigated pretty much every major politician in the ANC for corruption. So according to their mad conspiracy theory, myself and Andrew, who basically have made the ANC and the Russians our mortal enemy by investigating them for criminality and wrongdoing. We're actually secretly agents of them. And the substance of that relationship, I mean, the real victim in that relationship is Sir Keir Starmer, poor Sir Keir Starmer, who is being targeted by the Russians via me and Andrew as he's about to win an election. Yeah, I mean, like utterly mad, ludicrous, crazy nonsense, right? Now, that would be bad enough if they just got this report and they didn't do anything with it. But this is where the story that breaks last week comes in, which is that in January 2024, and I should point out that this is exactly the same time that I'm busy writing a follow-up article with Matt Taibbi about CCTH, Stop Funny Fake News. I should point out the person who, so let me go back in time a little bit, if you don't mind. Labour Together basically writes to what's called the National Cybersecurity Centre. And the person who's directing all of this, who's appointed APCO worldwide, the person who's appointed, said go and investigate them, and the person who's instructing, who's writing to the National Cybersecurity Centre is a guy called Josh Simons, who is now an MP. He's now a cabinet minister. But at the time, he was the director of Labour Together. He is also, I should point out, a very long-standing friend and colleague of both Morgan McSweeney and Imran Ahmed, who my investigations were reporting on, right? So he's now the director of this think tank, which is getting in, at the time, very substantial donations from a range of sort of millionaire and billionaire donors. He employs this company to go and dig up this mad evidence in this mad story, and then he spins this yarn to the National Cybersecurity Centre and says, "You should know that we are really concerned that poor Holden is handling material hacked by the Russian state, and is working with a network of pro-Kremlin actors to destabilize British democracy." And he's basically implores them. He said, please can you security services investigate this set of journalists for investigating my friends. Now, the thing that's even madder about it is that this Operation Cannon report, in addition to going after me and Andrew, also goes after Gabriel Pogrund of the Sunday Times, and really goes after him in like a really pretty nasty personal way. It goes after his personal life. Apparently, it makes some bizarre comments about his Jewish ethnicity and his political views, like pretty reprehensible, despicable stuff, right? Um,
Ugh.
so it's a pretty ugly smear campaign. The Times has reported that that even though the NCSC basically told Josh Simons to go away and that there was no reason to investigate, the allegations of this in this report and the broader allegation of like a Russian connection became part of a whispering campaign, where senior cabinet figures and senior politicians were told that there was some sort of Russian connection to this reporting. The Times even reported that Peter Mandelson was putting it about, that the Sunday Times reporting was linked to Russia. So it seems to have spread pretty widely. The thing
Which is
that
funny, given Peter Mandelson's extensive business connections in Russia. I mean, the emails with Jeffrey Epstein, where he repeatedly talks about how he's in Russia and all the rest of business threads.
and not least because APCO has itself represented a Russian oligarch, right? Like
Brilliant.
just mad stuff. So that's the sort of the crazy substance of the smear. Now it gets even, I'd had no idea, this was happening in January and in February 2024 until I got contacted by Pippa Cray, who's the deputy political editor of the Guardian, and she wrote to me at the same time as I was doing this follow-up story with Matt Taibbi, and also a follow-up story in the Telegraph, which is based on new documents I'd gotten through a Freedom of Information request from Electoral Commission, like absolutely rock solid, totally legitimate sourcing. And she wrote to me and she said, we are about to run a story in like basically less than 24 hours that's going to say that there was a massive national cybersecurity investigation into whether Labour Together's materials were hacked out of the Electoral Commission and that you were the recipient of that hack. And I was furious. I was like genuinely furious when I got that email because, I understand that I've only started getting a bit of a profile in the UK now, but at at that time, um, I was doing quite a lot of work, quite important work on like grand corruption and state capture in South Africa, right? I was working with law enforcement in South Africa. Part of my work in South Africa was about tracing like the vast amounts of money that had been looted out of the country by ANC MPs and politicians in this family called the Guptas. And I was helping authorities in South Africa trace that money. And actually, through that process, we've now recovered like close to $1 billion through fines and asset forfeiture proceedings. Um, Now, if it came out at that time that, if the Guardian reported, oh, actually, that, poor Holden was being investigated because he's a Russian spy, that would have like massively undermined those cases in South Africa, right? And it would have created like such immense problems for my colleagues, for our funders, for my career. It would have been potentially career ruining, right, if that allegation ran. So of course I wrote back to Pepper Cray and I said, like, what on earth are you talking about? I've never even heard about this hack. And if you say anything that links me to a Russian hack, I'll sue you immediately for defamation. And we corresponded over a couple of days, and eventually the story didn't run. I always felt a bit sore about that because Pippa Cray always told me that, while we're having this correspondence, and basically I was sitting and waiting there to see where the Guardian's going to destroy my professional reputation, and basically mean that it'd be impossible for me to raise funding to employ the number of junior researchers and investigators I work with. She kept on telling me, I'll tell you if the article's going to run or when it's going to run. I never heard from her. And I constantly had to write to her, being like, "Are you planning to destroy my reputation today or not?" Uh, so that's my sour grapes, which I'll put to the side for the moment. But effectively, what we had, was not just that I was being accused of being a Russian agent. It's that that was then given to the NCSC, and then that the fact that they had been given to the NCSC was then given to the media, and it's plain to me. The way I understand it very clearly is that Labour Together didn't want this reporting to come out. It was problematic for them. And in my opinion, what this looked like to me was an attempt to undermine my reporting, undermine my credibility, to link me to this mad Russian smear, which would be exactly in fulfillment of the contract's terms, which was to produce a package of materials that could proactively undermine this reporting. Um, so that's the mad smear, and that's its origin, and that's how I was prosecuted.
So, I mean, the real story there, of course, which the media should have reported, was that there was an attempt by people very senior within the Labour Party connected to Labour leadership uh, to smear journalists trying to scrutinise them. Um,
Yes.
in terms of Josh Simons, who's now a Cabinet Office Minister,
Mhm.
um, an extraordinary individual, and I do not mean that as a compliment.
Mhm.
Um, he, I don't know, just I think a lot of films would find him too one-dimensional as a character to cast him as a villain. No, but anyway, he's a Cabinet Office Minister. I mean, he just gives soulless hack. I know people who've had dealings with him, and let's just put it that this way: he's certainly one of the Labour new intake who is associated with, I guess, naked ambition, careerism, with not much else. But in terms of the how he's so basically he denied these claims, and but we'll come on to the investigation against him, and I've got more information. I can actually give you more
Right.
information shortly because I gave you some more information before, and now I've got even more information.
Oh dear.
But just I'll keep you hanging there. But just in terms of Josh Simons, tell me like what he said in response and why his defense is a nonsense.
I mean, you said a couple of things that I thought were like genuinely quite bizarre and offensive. So, in the first instance, the first story came out in the Sunday Times was about going after Gabriel Pogren and Harry York, and then my name was mentioned, and then he effectively put out a statement saying, you know, uh, what happened with APCO. I had no idea they were going to write this report that went so far. I never intended to go after to British journalists. And well, I'm a British journalist. I mean, he's effectively so there's this weird I'm in this weird Kafkaesque world where uh, effectively Josh Simons has decided that I'm not British, it seems. Um, Even though I've lived here for nearly close to 2 decades. I'm a British citizen. I'm a member of the National Union of Journalists. At the time I was working, that I was being investigated and reported by APCO, I was literally working with the Telegraph on a story. I'd just done a story with the Sunday Times. Um, he also, responded really dismissing the substance and like the gravity of the story. So there was a post on Twitter where somebody said the story is a nothing burger, and I don't think it's a nothing burger to investigate journalists and report into security services. And he said, yeah, exactly. There's basically nothing to the story. Will we appointed an organization to investigate a hack? Which I don't think is true, because the contract that they initially signed at the beginning said nothing about a hack at all. And in fact, there is no hack to investigate because my sourcing is entirely legitimate. And I understand that there's been, everybody said he needs to be investigated by the Cabinet Office. It's a bit difficult because he's a Cabinet Office minister, and there's all sorts of worries that whatever investigation is done by what's called the proprietary and ethics team would effectively clear him. I mean, I should point out that I have not heard a thing from the Cabinet Office since the story broke. So if they have been investigating Josh Simons, they've been doing it without me giving any input as to what I think his conduct is actually about and what I think his sanctions should be.
So I'll tell you what's now happened, by the way, just to keep you just to get you up to speed about your own plight.
Right.
So that's what I'm here for. So Josh Simons has accidentally. Dan Bloom, who's UK political editor for Politico, has posted a thread which I read the first part of to you, but now the thread has been added to. He said Josh Simons has accidentally messaged details of his case to a mass WhatsApp group of 2024 intake Labour MPs today. The message, swiftly deleted, said, Johnny rang, Prime Minister will ask Laurie to look into it. Aim is to move fast, but PET, Propriety and Ethics Team, did find I had not broken the code. Now, I'll carry on with what then. You already know that bit. But anyway, he then says, Dan Bloom, the journalist, says, translation, an accidental mass message revealed that the chief whip, Johnny Reynolds, had rung him and confirmed that Laurie Magnus, the independent advisor of Minister's Interest, will investigate the allegations against Simons relating to his time at Labour Together. It also appeared, Dan Bloom says, to be jumping the gun by saying Propriety and Ethics Team did find I had not broken the code. Officials claim that it's not for the Propriety and Ethics Team to clear anyone. They merely set out the facts to help the independent advisor reach a decision. A government official said of the above, this was an accidental post and clearly meant for a more private conversation. It's right that the independent advisor takes this away now. And just more generally, we know, because again, while we were originally talking before press hit record, the Guardian's revealed Keir Starmer opens investigation into Josh Simons over targeting of reporters. It's a formal investigation he's involved, obviously, in falsely accusing journalists of having links to pro-Russian propaganda, including literally targeting you because of your just literally family situation. I mean, it's just including who you're in a relationship with because of who's the daughter of a lovely guy, Andrew Murray, who anyway, who I've known for many years. He's a great guy on the left. Who's anyway.
Also a lovely journalist, by the way.
He is. Oh yeah, but there you go.
And he's the focus of this investigation. Yeah.
Oh,
he's in the lobby.
Yeah, of course. I did. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So when he says, when Josh Simons says, I haven't investigated any British journalists, well, you actually investigated Andrew Murray as well, and you made all sorts of scurrilous, false, defamatory allegations against him, saying that MI5 thinks he's a Russian spy, which, of course, is not true, because he's actually been cleared in order to receive his lobby pass and also parliamentary pass.
Exactly. That's a really good point. That's a really good point. And anyone who, look, I used to, years ago, I worked for John McDonnell, and I was a wee little lad. I was 21 onwards. But it took weeks before I was only 21-year-old. It took me weeks before I got a parliamentary pass because the security services have to go through it, literally everything. Probably in my case, my parents, my parents' history. Anyway, okay. So what do you make of all this then?
I mean, it seems to be another incredible Josh Simons joint. incredibly weird, gaff-prone guy. I think. I mean, I don't you remember that last year he gave that that bizarre interview, and it was not last year. It was like 2023. He gave an interview where he said, "I don't care about the human rights implications of how we treat asylum seekers."
He said, "Why don't you put the smuggler gangs on the barge and ship it up to Scotland for all I care?" And he said his objection to the government's Rwanda plan wasn't about human rights, it was about its effectiveness, and that was his alternative. And in the process, that was his first big media appearance. He was embroiled in a massive furore, not least because he clearly spoke about Scotland with total contempt. Send them to Scotland for like anyway, sorry. There we go.
So
Carry
separate
on.
thing. I mean, the idea that so first of all, if I mean, it seems like there's a lot of like a lack of clarity about exactly what has happened, what has happened. I mean, first of all, the fact there's now a cabinet office investigation, great. Um, I think it's good that it's being overseen by an independent advisor. Um, it does seem to me, if that message is correct, that Josh Simons fears, that believes that already been cleared by the propriety and ethics team. If that's even possible, which, if true, I just think is bizarre and weird and disturbing. Um, Not least because the proprietary and ethics team just simply do not have all the facts at their disposal to make that decision, and they don't have those facts at their disposal because they haven't spoken to me. And there's lots about the story that hasn't come out in public domain yet, which hasn't been disclosed, which I'm currently dealing with a set of lawyers, which will be which I'm literally today have been putting together to submit to Laurie Magnus. There's a lot more to the story than I think has even been revealed. Uh, and I think it'd be amazing, astonishing, like really absolutely absurd if he has already been cleared without that team even bothering to speak to me or my legal representatives, or bothering to speak to, I think, anybody who's been a victim of this particular thing. Uh, eh, if he has been cleared, I think it's just like absolutely insane, outrageous, scandalous, and it's not going to stand.
I mean, just finally, I mean, because I mean, it's who knows what's going to happen in the coming even hours, minutes, who knows? Um, but just the final kind of step back, big picture here about yeah. I mean, look, I should know by the way, just so everyone's fully up to speed, that your work has already toppled people in the Labour government. Not least, what's his bloody name now? Paul. Bloody
Paul,
well forgot his name, haven't I? History will forget him. So carry on.
yes,
Paul. What was it again?
Overton, Paul
That's the one.
Overton. Yeah.
And yeah, that was over disgusting messages that he sent about Diane Abbott, the first black female politician elected, and
Mhm.
extremely sexually explicit, just hideous messages. And which, if it was someone on the left who said spoke like that, that would just be, would be, that'd be the end of them. But now this person's just, treated as respected amongst lobby journalists and is just there pontificating and as a political commentator at the moment.
Mm,
Um, but I mean, in terms of and Morgan McSween is obviously gone because of
mhm.
his links to Peter Mandelson and how he promoted him as US ambassador despite his association with the late paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. And but this is about the Starmer project. The core, what I mean. Firstly, what do you think, Keir Starmer, his role in all this? I know he's just the front man by the words of his own aides, but the Starmer project, what this says about this entire collapsing. I think we can write his obituary at this point. The collapsing
Yes.
political project.
I mean, the problem that this administration has is that Labour Together is absolutely central to this government. So it's not just this. So, and I think this is something that gets lost in the discussion on Labour Together is that there's actually two phases to the Labour Together story, right? There's the phase between 2017 and 2020, where Morgan McSweeney is using Labour Together and his undeclared money to destroy the left and then get Starmer elected leader, right? Then there's a period of about 2 years where effectively Together goes dormant, and then it's relaunched in 2023 with Josh Simons as its CEO. And the point about the relaunch of Labour Together at that stage is that it looks like there's going to be a Labour government coming into power. So Labour Together is relaunched as what they call, what Josh Simons himself says is the provisional wing of Starmerism. The idea is that Labour Together will be used to incubate the policies that the Labour government will introduce. It'll also effectively become like a bit of a kindergarten for future MPs and, of course, Josh Simons himself. when the election is called, he's parachuted in as an MP. Perhaps even more importantly, Labour Together then becomes a major funder of incoming Labour MPs. So Labour Together takes in millions of pounds in donations from millionaire and billionaire donors, which it's then distributing to support the election campaigns of over 100 incoming Labour Party MPs, including a range of sitting cabinet ministers. So at a very fundamental, deep level, at the same time that Josh Simons is reporting into security services and employing APCO and going after journalists, Labour Together is also starting to raise the money to fund the careers of incoming MPs, right? So a scandal about Labour Together isn't just the scandal about a think tank. It's about a scandal about the entirety of this political project, about the entirety of so many members of Keir Starmer's cabinet are linked to the Labour Together project historically and currently, and about 100 MPs of the 400 of the Labour MPs in Parliament have received funding from Labour Together. So if Labour Together is tainted by these allegations, it becomes existential for this government in a really profound and deep way. Because what you're saying at that point is that this government is the product of a two-phase period in which Labour Together has done some pretty problematic things. And it showed in both instances, I think it's one of the things that's interesting. At both instances, both in 2017 to 2020, and again in the second phase, there's like real hostility towards accountability, scrutiny, independent journalism that reveals their wrongdoing. And I think it speaks to the deep ethical and political hole at the heart of our government. Because I think at this point in time, with Morgan McSweeney gone, he was effectively the spirit animal of this government. He was the motive force behind it. We have a prime minister who doesn't really understand anything, doesn't understand his own cabinet, probably doesn't even understand the substance of the scandal necessarily, because all of this has been done outside and without him, in order to have him as the prime minister, while everybody else gets to make hay with proximity to power. And I just think it's just such a fitting, apt illustration of like the deep and profound ethical morass that this political project emerged out of, and in the way it's governed, which has basically made everybody hate them. I think once you understand this full story of Labour Together, the full story of how Keir Starmer was, Labour Together got Keir Starmer elected leader, and then effectively came to dominate the cabinet and the state, and what they were doing throughout this period of time to achieve power, the horror show that is this Labour government in the way that it's governed, the way that it's prescribed Palestine actions, cut winter fuel allowance, gone after disability benefits, cut international aid, has been wishy-washy on the environment, has decided to try to pretend to be Donald Trump when it comes to building regulations. All the stuff is predictable. All the stuff is totally totally makes sense in light of the story. I think it's also very fitting that in the last phases of this despicable government, it's this scandal that comes back to light to shed light on, to reveal and make us reflect on close to a decade of pretty disgusting politics that I think has made us all worse off, and the Labour Party spiraling into an existential crisis.
I think that's a very fitting description of the entire situation, to be honest. And I think, your work has been absolutely critical. Years and years and years of very thorough, detailed, exhausting work, which has led to you being smeared by obviously senior figures within the British Labour Party. And I guess what at least is reassuring, despite all that, is, that there is a reckoning. And that wouldn't necessarily be the case, I'm afraid, given the balance of forces within the society in which we live and the media universe in which we live. And it's worth emphasizing that, in a lot of the reporting in mainstream outlets, Paul's role has been completely erased or downplayed or just not properly accurately reported at all. And the reason this has ended up being a scandal is because the government, the senior Labour figures touched the wrong people. They went after mainstream mainstream journalists at the Sunday Times who are seen as kind of, people you're not supposed to go after.
Mm.
But it's the hard graft and work that you've put in, which has inflicted huge damage, rightly so, on an already collapsing government, but also exposed the Starmer project for what it is. And the danger is, without your work, is a lot of that would have remained in the shadows. We wouldn't have understood what we're dealing with. We wouldn't have understood who these people are, and therefore we wouldn't have been able to draw the appropriate lessons. And this is a warning, and it's a warning that needs to be heeded. That these are not people that you can compromise with. These are people who want to destroy you if you believe vaguely in progressive ideas. They are nasty, nasty people. And they're rightly facing political destruction. Anyway, please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts and your comments, help us just share the video, get the message out so Paul is heard properly. But Paul, thank you as ever for your brilliant hard work, which is rightly is paying off in deserved ways.
Thank you very much. Thank you.